Hi, everyone, and welcome to Patent Literacy Symposium, the session entitled Bridge from Phonemic Awareness to Reading, Effective Ways to Teach Essential Skills in the Classroom. My name's Kirsten DeRoche, and I'm so happy to be here to be able to facilitate this session with Kelly Fowler. A few housekeeping items before the session starts. This session will be 75 minutes long. The session is being recorded. The chat feature will be between the participants and Kelly and I. And as I told Kelly earlier, I'll monitor that for you if there's any questions that come up through there. Please keep your video feature off and mute yourself to eliminate any potential distractions. The presenters requested that you please enter questions into the chat, and then we will look at those and answer those at the end of the session. And we'd love for you to tweet out or share on social media or all that you're learning from the Literacy Symposium. So the hashtag for that is hashtag PALitSymposium2020. And now I'd like to introduce you to Kelly Fowler from the Apple Group. So, Kelly Fowler is a certified dyslexia therapist and a qualified instructor of Connections OG in 3D. After earning a degree in elementary education and beginning her teaching career, she was chosen to begin training as a certified academic language therapist through LEAD or LEAD in 1997. She has over 4,000 hours of experience in dyslexia therapy. Kelly is an expert in school-based dyslexia therapy and whole class science-based reading instruction. She serves on the Center for Effective Reading Instruction Review team to accredit universities and training centers that teach the IDA knowledge and practice standards. She is the instructor of several courses at the Apple Group in Jonesboro, Arkansas, where she serves as the Director of Outreach and Training. In addition to her busy private practice in dyslexia therapy and testing, Kelly is the co-author of the Apple Group Dyslexia Screener. She presents workshops both locally and nationally on themes related to dyslexia, phonological awareness, and the science of reading. She worked closely with school districts and universities who are working to implement science-based reading, and with parents as an advocate for dyslexia. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming today amidst our tech issues to hear the presentation on teaching in 3D and why we at the Apple Group agree with that and promote that. So, as you know, that you probably read a name, Mary Margaret Scholtens was also going to be with me presenting, and she usually is. She just had, and she wanted me to let everybody know that she had some appointments at Mayo Clinic that because of the COVID and the coronavirus and everything being shut down, all of those appointments from March were moved to this week, and so she couldn't change any of that. So she's very sad that she's not with us, but she's usually she's the researcher, and she knows a lot of research, and she can spit that research off really quick and do it very well. I am more of the application piece. That's why we work so well together and present well together. So a little bit of grace would be helpful today for me for the research piece of it. I'm going to do both. So we will do all of the research first and all of the why behind everything. And then I'm going to actually show you how to implement that within your classrooms. All righty. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully everything will work like clockwork. But you never know. There we go. Okay, so I told you a little bit about the Apple Group, or about Mary Margaret. The Apple Group was created or became in existence in 1997 through Cherry Frierson, who is Mary Margaret's mother. So Mary Margaret Scholtens and Cherry Frierson. Cherry is a dyslexic, and Connections is the name of the program that we use to train to teach the science of reading. Of course, it is for struggling readers, dyslexics, and as we know now, the science behind how every skilled and accurate readers should be taught how to read. So it is for both. It's for the dyslexic, the struggling reader, as well as your garden variety child in your classroom that needs to be taught the science of reading. So we started in 1997. As Kirsten said, I was starting my education in Texas at the time in 1997, while Mary Margaret and Terry were in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and they were traveling to the Northeast and the Midwest to do more of their training and the Orton-Gillingham framework. And everybody's been trained in lots of different programs and certified in lots of different programs. Terry and Mary Margaret actually wrote Connections a long time ago. I think it was started in 2000 actually, or actually 1999, 2000. And it comes from, it follows the original Orton-Gillingham framework, and it follows the original Orton-Gillingham scope and sequence from the Gillingham manual. But Cherry, being dyslexic, knows how she learns best, and that's by doing and touching and feeling. So that is the framework of what that OG in 3D is, and we'll be discussing more of that today as the presentation moves on. Okay, so as dyslexics, they think in 3D, so why not use that and teach? It makes sense to teach them in 3D. You know, a dyslexic, usually, Cherry will say that she thinks in pictures. She thinks, like when she thinks about an apple, in her brain, in her mind, she can see the top, the bottom, and all around that apple. Whereas I'm not dyslexic, and I think of an apple, and I just think of the 2D in my brain. So it makes sense for us to teach these children in 3D, and all children in 3D. So if you think about it, our brain and the information, how we display, how that the success or failure of helping a person with a disorder like dyslexia to read lies not only in how their brain works, but also how information is presented. So we want to make sure, and that's from Leonard in 2003, we want to make sure that the information that we're presenting to our readers, whether they're dyslexic or not, teaching the science of reading, we want that to be a method that they can connect and they can hold on to, and it makes from concrete to abstract. So as our friend Sally Shaywitz says, maximize your strength and minimize your weakness. So we're going to use that strength and we're going to minimize their weakness, which is the struggling reader or a reader that's just learning to read. That decoding piece is their weakness until they can actually break that alphabetic code. So we are going to maximize their strength by minimizing their weakness. So we have 3D objects for hooks. By teaching the process of reading, by using these three-dimensional objects, it's a mode of which a struggling reader or an emerging reader or a new reader can already succeed. They are given a hook which to attach that sound to that hook into those symbols. So they have that sound with that 3D object. They can attach the symbol, the grapheme, to that phoneme, and that visual spatial strength is used to teach to the weakness in decoding. So that's one reason why we use those 3D objects. So for global thinking, dyslexia is associated with a particular type of visual spatial talent. It's enhanced ability to process visual spatial information globally, holistically, rather than locally, like that part to part. And if you want these quotes, I did not send these quotes or the PowerPoint, but I will send them at the end, and then we can put them on your portal, on the patent portal, and then you all will be able to download these quotes.
Great. Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome. So we start with phonemic objects. By using phonemic objects, we're addressing that strength of that visual spatial ability for the dyslexics and for that struggling reader to see the big picture first. For example, this is a picture of an apple on here. Well, when we actually have an apple for those kids to hold, then we can break it down into those phonemes of what we're really trying to teach with that particular object. But it gives them the bigger picture, and then we're going to that smaller phoneme within whatever phoneme you're trying to teach within that object. So they're actually able to hold a sound and not just hear that sound. So by holding that sound, they, in the palm of their hand, then that becomes the natural bridge for these, where they connect these sounds to the printed symbols that they represent. So we want those students to actually hold that sound in their hand. And then we use our desire to touch. We all want to touch everything, and think about it. When you are sitting at home, or sitting in the car line, sitting in the Starbucks line, wherever you are, our natural response is to pick up our phone and start touching and messing with our phone. And especially now. So we want to use that desire to touch with these, and it takes the fear out of learning, and and by using the objects, it takes that fear out of learning. It takes advantage of that natural desire to touch, which is why we were born. I mean, when we were born, we wanted to touch everything. Think about your children, or other children that you've seen. Babies, they like to touch and they like to taste. They put things in their mouth all of the time. They want to feel. So that child is able to explore sound in 3D before moving it to flat print. So we want to make sure that we are starting with that desire and using that desire to, like I said, or I didn't say it, Sally Shaywitt said, to maximize their strength and minimize their weakness. So Albert Einstein said, if I can't picture it, I can't remember it. So here's just an example of, and this is an old example when Connections was first started. So we attach those objects to that grapheme they actually are touching that fish and able to touch it and then isolate that initial sound if that's what you're teaching. So that's just a quick example. And then we are, sounds build into words. So by teaching, allows that student to only, by this way of teaching, allows that student not to only see, but also feel how those sounds build into words before they ever see a printed symbol. And students who are dyslexic learn first by understanding that big picture. And so that's another reason why we're, with that global thinking, we start with that big object, or the object that represents that phoneme, that smaller sound that you're working with. And that's why that goes right into big picture and then the sounds. And they get to see, hear, hold, and feel that sound. And they're able to do that even with the spelling rules and all of that. So you want your kids to be able to see it, hear it, hold it, and feel it. We've been kind of labeled over at the Apple Group and Connections that Connections is multisensory on steroids, because we want the kids to engage in every part of the structure of the English language. And so that's another reason why we use 3D objects to teach all of that. So we're going from concrete to abstract. So we want the objects are that concrete representation of the sound. So the student not only sees the letter, hears the sound, but also holds and feels the sound. And this adds more senses to help him or help them remember that. It connects more parts of their brain as well for them to put it in their long-term memory in that word form area that we all are learning so much about. So that's concrete to abstract. And then we are blending and sequencing. We use these 3D objects to blend and to sequence. And when we're done with the presentation, then I'm going to show you how to actually implement using 3D objects. So I'll go into more of this during that part where we read with objects and we manipulate phonemes and all of that. And you can position the objects into various initial, medial, and final positions, and the student learns to blend and to sequence and discriminate those sounds between those sounds. You can teach all of phonemic awareness and phonological awareness by using that 3D hook. And through these multisensory techniques and repetition, the sound of the letter is imprinted on the neural pathways, and we will show you how that works a little bit later. And I say we because Mary Margaret should be here, and she's very sad she's not. All right, there's that. So by using that, we're connecting, we're imprinting, and we are working on the myelin sheath to make that information zap as fast as it can to make him become automatic in that decoding and in that encoding, so that they would have the cognitive desk space, so to speak, to be able to comprehend what they're reading, to attach meaning to all of those. Okay, like we said, we also use it to teach the rules and the patterns of English, and I'll show you an example of that as well when we move over to that part of the presentation. We're transferring knowledge. We want to transfer, and as you can see in this slide, we're transferring from that object to the grapheme, and then we can transfer, even pulling out that beginning sound, that initial sound in that fish, or if you're even working with the ending sound or the medial sound, but it gives them something to hold onto with that transfer of knowledge. You can practice, it helps them with practicing spelling. He's learned the rule, or the student has learned the rule by using a way of thinking that he's already successful in and comfortable with. Because reading, we're not wired learning to read, we're not born wired to read. So it is a complex skill, and we need to make sure that we're using what those students are comfortable with and successful with to actually help them to succeed and give them the connections that they need. So information absorbed best when using multiple senses, and that's Metcalf in 1997. Now, if Mary Margaret was here, oh, you know what? And that is where we have 10% of what you read, you remember, 20% of what you hear, you remember, 30% of what you see, you remember, 50% of what you see and hear, you remember, and then 70% of what you say, you remember, 90% of what you do and say, you remember. And so that's those multiple senses, using all of those senses. And I know that we all agree with all of that, but we're just, like we said, using that 3D object to give them something to hold on to. Now, if Mary Margaret was here, and I kept this in the presentation, even though that I'm going to tell her story, she is very, very careful about all of the research that she shares, whether we're presenting or we're in a training, anything. She just is, she checks out all of the sources until she knows for sure that they are correct. So and I don't even have this slide, just have this slide because I don't even want to put this one in print. But in 2005, our Jonesboro Sun newspaper quoted Mary Margaret Scholtens, director of the Apple Group, with this quote: "Over 50% of NASA employees are dyslexic. They are deliberately sought after because they have superb problem-solving skills and excellent in 3D and spatial awareness." So that is a quote that our newspaper, and we have 70,000 people in town, and in 2005 we didn't have that many, I don't think. But so it's a small newspaper, but we were getting ready to do a connections training, and Mary Margaret got a phone call. And this phone call was from Michael Hartman. from NASA. And he said, I need to speak with Mary Margaret Scholtens. And she said, this is Mary Margaret. And her husband, Jay, is a practical jokester. So she thought it was Jay kind of messing with her because she was trying to get out the door. Anyway, he said, you were quoted on this that 50% of NASA employees were dyslexic and they're highly sought after. We need to know how you got that information. And she said, well, I'll have to go find it. It's in my notes. I'll have to. And then she goes, but Jay, I don't have time for this. I've got a connections class. I've got to go. Leave me alone. I got to go. And he said, I don't know who you're talking about. This is Michael Hartman from NASA. And I need to find out where you learned about this. So she gets off the phone. She calls Jay, and Jay says, I didn't call you. And so then this is when we had answering machines still, and it showed that who it was from. It said NASA is what she says. And she called her mom and she goes, Mom, help, we got to find where did we find this quote? And I've got to use this, I've got to figure it out. And so they found it. It was, and I can't remember the name specifically, but it was a researcher overseas in England. And so she called Michael Hartman back and she explained, I just parrot the research. I definitely check to make sure it's true, but I just parrot the research. This is the person that you need to contact about finding out where they got this information. And Michael Hartman said, okay, but he just kept talking about, well, how did you get it? She said, I just read it in a book. And she noticed, and it was in several IDA notes from IDA conferences that she'd gone to. So it has been around. And then she thought, well, I do just parrot the research, but I want to make sure that everything that I say is true. So if this isn't true, could you please let me know so that I won't say it anymore? And he said, ma'am, I don't know how you got the information, but I cannot tell you if it's true or not, but you should not have the privilege of getting that information. And so then she looked up Michael Hartman because she takes notes when she's on the phone. So she was writing everything down. She looked up, and he was the director of the Learning Differences office at NASA. So all of that to say, now she is still a little worried. That's why we don't put that in print anymore, because she's a little worried that one day a lot of black cars will come up in her driveway and take her away because of quoting that. So anyway, just a little funny story to tell you that she does check all of her sources. Okay, so let's talk about this neurosurgeon, he is Stanislas Dehaene. I hope that I said that correctly. I've been practicing that quite a bit, these names. And if neuroscience turns you on, then this is the guy you need to listen to. You need to read his books on how the brain, the name of one of his books is Reading in the Brain and How We Learn to Read. It is a wealth of information. And we talk about that word form area where we want everything to become automatic, and how all of this comes together to become a skilled and accurate reader. So in his book, in chapter 5 of that book, he says that learning to read involves connecting two sets of brain regions that are already present in infancy: the object recognition system and the language circuit. Reading acquisition has three major phases: the pictorial stage, a brief period where children photograph a few words, then the phonological stage where they learn to decode graphemes into phonemes, and the orthographic stage where word recognition becomes fast and automatic. So we talk about how we're not wired to read, but speaking is natural, reading is not. But he talks about more in that book, in that word form area, that the visual word form area is where you that facial recognition at first, and then it moves over to the right side of the brain, and you replace that with the sounds and the graphemes that make those sounds. So we want to make sure that we, like we said, we want everything that we're teaching in decoding and in reading and in science of reading to move into these the children's mental lexicon, and that visual word form area where it becomes automatic. So like I said, that's why we are going to work with or start with that 3D representation, going from concrete to abstract. So there's another study that has to do with the physical models. Physical models enhance molecular three-dimensional literacy in Introduction Biochemistry course. That's the name of this in it's a National Science Foundation. And they found the results of that suggest that the physical models, so we're thinking that physical model can play an important role in capturing the interest of the students in the subject of that molecular structure and function. So that's within that particular study. So the physical models often simulate more sophisticated questions in the minds of the students. So if you take that and you start with that physical model of that sound that student can hold, then that interest, you're in that engagement in the students, regardless of the age. I have a 16-year-old that I'm teaching right now, and she's using the 3D objects as well because it's something she'll never outgrow. She wants to touch, feel, and do, and it helps them connect. So that's another study that you can look into to talk about the physical models and how it works for us. Okay, so you all probably have seen Dr. Tolman's hourglass figure of phonemic awareness and the orthography, and how it's talking about the progression of early, basic, and advanced, and how then you have that one-to-one that connects the letters and the sounds and the orthography piece. So we're talking about teaching the phonemic awareness with those 3D objects. And when we teach phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, and particularly how we segment and blend with those objects, and that's going to help students represent those graphemes, or children to learn to spell, to get those graphemes to represent those sounds, the phonemes. So you're talking about some of you may be really familiar with the 4-part processor, with that phonological processor and that orthographic processor as well. All right, so teaching phonemic awareness, I just told you that quote. So now you teach sounds, we want to add those sounds with the letters. And we're talking, when we teach phonemic awareness, that can be in the dark. You're not adding letters, but as soon as we add letters, that helps the children to see how that relates, how those sounds relate in our world, in the reading and the writing world. So as soon as you're able to teach those with those students, you would want to do that. The letters, you want to manipulate the letters and manipulate the phonemes. If we explicitly teach and systematically teach phonemic awareness to the advanced levels, the manipulating of the sounds, to every student in kindergarten and first grade, we will reduce the number of reading problems by 50 to 75%, and that's David Kilpatrick in 2011. So using the progression of phonemic awareness by all the way to those advanced levels of manipulating and deleting those phonemes, that will help, because we're explicitly teaching that, and we start that with that concrete object to help do that. So phonemic awareness instruction makes a stronger contribution to the improvement of reading and spelling when children are taught to use letters as they manipulate phonemes than when instruction is just limited to phonemes alone. And that's from Reading First in 2006. So as you can see here, we're wanting to orthographically map. This is an example of orthographically mapping sounds. So think about if the teacher said the word fit, and then we segmented that fit into those 3 sounds, it, and then we orthographically mapped those graphemes that made those sounds. And that's what we're trying to do with the students, with the visual word form area, with the, you want that high or that deep lexical quality from Charles Perfetti with each of these words for these students. So we're orthographically mapping, and that's why that progression is like that. So let's see. Oh, I gotta use my mouse, sorry. Just for example, you can go fit. Oh, I went too far. Hold on, sorry about that. Let me go back to that one. So you fit, and then if we said fit to fish, this is sound chaining where you're changing those sounds. And then it's just different examples of orthographic mapping for you all. And like I said, I'm going to show you how to do this specifically with or implement it inside your classroom with actual 3D objects. Okay, so the brain responds to novelty and sensory involvement. That's from Louisa Moats. This is Mary Margaret, and she, like we said, at the Apple Group, we all talk about 3D objects that we want to do. And it's not just the 3D objects. The kids are engaged in every part of the literacy instruction. We do not just give a workbook for them to work on there. We want them to actively involve the sensory part, all of their senses in doing this. And Louisa Moat said workbooks are great for independent practice when concepts have been well taught. They are not categorically despicable, just often misused as a substitute for teaching. So does that mean that we don't ever, at the Apple Group, ever give some sort of data collecting through a worksheet? No, we do. But when we're explicitly teaching those students, we start at that concrete stage and move to the abstract for them. So that's one way we use for that multimodal learning of why we do what we do. So there has been 30 years of research in the structured evidence of structured, sequential, direct, and explicit teaching. And with IDA talks about and has done all the research on what is a multisensory structured literacy. You can look on IDA's website and look through all of that. We're taking these two bodies of research, and that's how we've come from the 3D bridge from phonemic awareness to reading. So we wanted you all to know that it's just not, oh yeah, let's use objects to teach reading. There is research behind what our brain does to learn to read, how we can maximize the strengths and minimize the weaknesses through all of that different research to show why we actually do what we do here at the Apple Group. So enough of that, and I will switch over. Hopefully my document camera will work. I was having trouble getting it to load, so I will switch screens and see if I can't pull it up. Let's see. Yes, so for some reason it's not actually showing my document camera. So let me see. It's showing my whiteboard on my document camera, but not my document camera. Let me see if I can get it. Right before I was logging on, my entire computer shut down and everything went black. So I don't know if I hit a cord or something. So everything had to reload, and it's not reloading well for some reason. So if you'll give me 1 second, if not. Sorry about this. I don't know why. I think I'll shut that down and see if it'll let me load it again and see if it'll come up. Technology never works when you want it to, ladies and gentlemen. So hold on for a second. while that is loading. Okay, so while that's loading, we'll see if it comes back up. If not, we will improvise. I can always improvise. Okay. So for example, oh, it did, yay. All right. Okay, so there's my document camera. I was about to use my iPhone as a document camera too, which was an earlier session. So by teaching that sound, for example, the kids have a pig and they actually are able to hold that sound, and we isolate that sound. We can break it down to onset and rhyme, and it lends itself to great vocabulary depending on the object in your students to figure out what they know and what they don't know and what you actually need to teach vocabulary-wise. The objects do. But if we were just doing initial sounds, then we could break that down into onset and rhyme. Ig. You can talk about the manner of articulation, what's going on in your mouth when you're producing those sounds, and you take those apart. And then if we had an apple, so you have a pig and an apple, and then a tiger. So this is just initial sounds with these objects, and you're just practicing those initial sounds. You can think about phonemic awareness, the early, the basic, and the advanced levels of phonemic awareness. You can have lots of objects that begin with P, that begin with the P sound, and the kids can match by alliteration, by discovering what that sound is, that all of those, when you're teaching a new sound, you're actually teaching, starting with phonemic awareness, because I'm not adding any letters right now. I'm just working on the sounds, where they are actually matching by alliteration all of those objects with that sound. So reading with objects is one thing that we do with our students. And the reason we use reading with objects is to show the progression from concrete to abstract for our students. It really works well when your students are having trouble blending. I had a student that really had difficulty with looking at letters and blending them, even after I've taught the particular letters in lesson 1. So we just sat here without letters, just with objects, so that she could get the concept of blending those sounds. So you can touch p, at, p, at, pat. And so they're reading without even a word, without a letter, and they're just blending those phonemes, which is one of your levels of phonemic awareness that you definitely want to teach. You can, once you've taught those letters, and you can actually teach and have them pull down the letters that match those sounds. P, a, t, p, a, t. And they can see the letters, you're attaching those letters. And then we actually have a word card that would have that word on there, so they could see the progression from concrete to abstract, because your letters are still a little 3D. You can pick them up, you can feel them, but when you're reading a printed word, even if I just wrote the word below it, the students, that's flat. And that is so abstract for our students, for our readers. So we're moving from concrete to abstract with those 3D objects. Okay. So that would be one way that you could do that when you're just doing initial sounds, when you're teaching your new concepts, all of those different pieces with that, matching by alliteration, blending. You can even say the word pat and then have them pull down objects, at, and then they're segmenting those sounds as well. You can practice manipulating. So if you had, let's say we had, that's a bull up there, and maybe let's do a fish. So we have a bull and a fish, and so if we had p, at, pat, and I wanted to change the word to fat, and so my students would repeat pat, and they've actually touched them. So that helps with that working memory component. It allows them to hold something in their working memory, especially your students that have trouble, have deficits in working memory, or it's a struggle for them to be able to retain that verbal information long enough to do something with that, to work with that stuff, work with that information is really tricky for some of our students. So the objects lend itself for them to actually hold that sound like you saw on the slide in the palm of their hand. They're holding that sound. So if they had at and they wanted to change, we wanted to change it to fat. And I just had a 5.5-year-old do this on Zoom 2 days ago. And she would change pat, she would change the pig to the fish. And then she would say at, fat. And you can continue to manipulate those phonemes, which manipulating those phonemes, if you remember, is the advanced level of phonemic awareness. But we're not doing it just all auditorily. We're doing it where they're actually holding something. And like I said, my 5.5-year-old that I do Zoom with at 8 o'clock in the mornings, she was doing this like a champ yesterday. And I was just giving her words, and she had the exact same objects that I had on her at her house, and she was just manipulating. And I would just say, okay, change fat to bat. And then she said, oh, you take away the fish and you add the bull. And she could immediately do that. And now I know that that is so concrete for her, and that she's secure with that. I can start adding those letters underneath it, and she can do that with those letters. So that's one way that you can use the objects. Okay, so we also talked about teaching. Another way you can do it is with the manipulating or sound chaining. A lot of you are probably very familiar with sound chaining. So sound chaining is when you're changing one sound in a word one at a time. And you can change the initial, the medial, the final sound, however you want to do that. Usually that's done all auditorily with chips of some sort. If you have magnetic chips, and then you can, I don't know where my magnetic, oh, here's my magnetic one, and then you could say, so if you had bat, and you go, and you had all these chips, and you bring at, bat, and you can read the word. And then if you wanted to change bat to fat, the old word is bat, at. Want to change it to fat, out with the in with the at, fat. So that's how we normally do phonemic awareness and manipulating phonemes. So kids that have working memory issues, or students that really don't have working memory issues too, I mean, it really helps for them to hold something. So what if we did it this way? This, if you can tell, let me move my screen up a little bit. That is a pot. So then we have our kids segment that sound, and we call it finger spelling in our curriculum. So pot, ought, and they could pull down the chips to represent that. Ought, pot. Well, they actually have an object instead of just hearing that sound. And then if I want to change pot to a dot, so now we can move the pot out of the way, but they still have it there where they can look at it. So if they're having trouble keeping that word in their working memory to do something with, then they have a visual representation of it that they've actually held in the palm of their hand. So we have pot, and we change it to dot, ought, and I want to change it to d, out with the p, in with the d. Then you have dot. So if you had a dot, and then you want to change dot to a dog. So I've been changing my initial phonemes, and now I'm changing my ending, dot, and I want to change it to dog, out with the t, in with the g. Then you can continue to do it like dog to log. So that would be a sound chaining kit with the actual objects for them to hold that in their working memory instead of just doing it all auditorily. And it really is difficult for students, like we said, with the working memory issues where they have trouble connecting and keeping that information in their brain long enough to do something with it. So another thing that you can do with 3D objects of bridging that into reading. Reading is not just all initial sounds and medial sounds and final sounds. You know, you can do rhyming. We have all different levels of phonemic awareness kits that you can use to teach all of this to everybody. But we want to be able to use these objects also to teach the spelling rules that govern, or the rules that govern our spelling. So let me get out some objects. This is one of our lessons in connections. It's lesson 35. And if I just have some different objects out here, patch, it's a wrench. So you can see the vocabulary that you have. It's incredible that you have with your students just by the different objects you have. And this is a dinosaur that's hatching. Talk about the vocabulary and the building of the background knowledge. That's so important for reading, and you can start at this level. You have church. So if I had, and I have several different objects in here, but if I had these objects, and I'm just going to write them, the words on how to spell them, and I would initially ask those students, what sound do you hear at the end of all of those objects that is the same? So then we would break that down. Atch, wrench, ch, hatch, atch, church, ch. So hopefully the students would say ch, and then you could say yes, but there are two ways that we're going to spell that sound. They've already learned one way in connections. We've already taught them one way how to spell the ch sound way at the very beginning, in the very beginning of the curriculum, and they've learned that CH spells the ch, or represents the ch sound, those letters that digraph CH. So we would talk about that. And then usually in a lesson we are writing or using our letters, but for the sake of time, I'm going to actually just write out hatch, hatch, church, wrench. And let me see if I can find something else so that, what if I had a crutch? Okay, so if I had all of those words written out by those objects, and they discovered, before I even have written any of the words down, they have discovered that they hear that final ch sound. And I'm going to tell them there are two ways to spell that final ch sound, and we've got to figure out there's a reason why. We want to tell our students why that something is spelled the way it is, unless it's a word that breaks, you know, that's not phonetically spelled correctly because of the way it sounds. So we discover, if I would segment patch, patch, that ch is spelled with a TCH. Hatch, atch, TCH. Church, ch, CH. Wrench, ch. So we hit crutch, ch. So you have TCH and CH, and we've got to figure out why. So the kids can actually discuss, and when we segment, and we're using our fingers to segment those sounds for patch, atch, is a short vowel. And so that's a short vowel right there, okay? What about hatch? Atch, is another short vowel. That vowel sound, is it long or short? Crutch, ch, that's a short. So what happened when that ch sound was actually touching the short vowel sound? How did I spell it? And the students would figure out that it was TCH because I represented that. I showed them how to spell that, but now they're figuring out why. I'm not telling them why, they are actually figuring it out. And then we can do the same with when you would use CH. And we would talk about that those are consonants, or that R's consonant, but it's a part of that R controlled vowel team, that you use TCH when it's touching a short vowel at the end of a word. Otherwise, you use CH for everything else. But we did all of that with that concrete piece. They had several objects to discuss to figure it out instead of just being told that you use TCH at the end of a word after a short vowel. This allows them that transfer of information to be able to connect it in all parts of their brain to make it automatic. Because when you make those things automatic and you build that lexical quality in those words, they can attach meaning to those words, and then it becomes automatic for them in that word, the visual word form area, where they can begin to read automatic, and that comprehension is so much easier for these kids because they're not spending that time decoding as much. So you definitely want to implement your 3D objects. You can do it with all of your phonemic awareness. You can match by alliteration with initial sound. You can do rhyming. You can count with phonological awareness. You can count syllables. And instead of just counting syllables with words that you give, let them have objects and figure out how many syllables are in that word. You can delete syllables. We have an elision kit that you can we use with compound words, and you can delete a syllable. So if you had a cowboy and then I have a cow and a boy, and I actually take away the boy, the object of the boy, what do I have left? A cow. So they're deleting those syllables, and then you can break it all the way down to deleting those phonemes and manipulating those phonemes, which are your advanced levels of phonemic awareness. So I will, in the handouts, give you a list of just some basic phonemic awareness objects that you can add to the program that you're using, and just different things that you can do, everything that we talked about here, that you'll have a list of those things that you're able to use in your phonemic awareness or in your reading instruction, in your literacy instruction. Now, if we're having to teach remotely, which we probably will have to do some sort of remote teaching or learning, make sure that your students, if you're using objects, that they have a set of objects as well that match your objects, so they can actually hold it and not just see it on the screen. So if we were in person, you all would have had your own little bag of objects to practice with, but we had no idea who was signing up. We couldn't mail all of that out in time. There was no way. But we want you, even as participants, we are firm believers that we actually do what we're teaching. So every training we do, the participants are actually doing all pieces of it and not just listening to the presenters like you had to today. Sorry, and I just had to show you. So, okay. Let me show you one more thing of a student, a little video of a student. Let me pull it up. This is a little girl. Let me move. Hold on. Oh, no, I don't want that. It covered up my screen, so I need to get back to where I was on there. A video of this little girl has been in therapy. And can you all see that? Yes, can I see that? Okay. All right. So this little girl has been in therapy for 2 months, maybe, or 3 months. So she had already attached the letters to the sounds, but she's going to be manipulating phonemes. And her name is Piper.
Okay. All right. This is a rug. Can you finger spell it for me? Find those letters for me and see if you can spell rug. Okay, touch your letters and say R-U-G spells rug. Okay, but what if I did this? What if instead of rug, I put out a bug? What would you have to do then? Okay, so what would you have to change? Then what are you going to put out there? What are you going to change it to? Right. But what if I took it and I did this? What if I took the bug off and I changed it to bag? What are you gonna do? Okay. What if I did this? What if I took the bag off and I changed it to bat? It's in the second half. Right by your finger. All right, touch and name. B-B-A-T spells bat. All right, but what if I took that bat off and I changed it to a rat? Mhm. Okay, touch the letters and tell me what they are. R-A-T, rat. Okay, what if I change the rat to a rag? Rag. Understand, pretty close. Okay, what do you hear at the end? Mm-hmm. Okay, now you spelled what? Rag. Rag. Okay, let's start all over again. And I'm going to get some different things out. Okay, what if I put out a hat? Mm-hmm. Okay. Touch your letters and say H-A-T, hat. But what if I change the hat to a cat? What are the letters? C-A-T, cat. What if I changed cat to cut with those little scissors? Good, but what if I did this? What if I put a cup down instead? It's in the second half. Mhm. What are your letters? C-U-P. Spells what? Cup. What if I changed your cup to a bear cub? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Finger spot and see if you got it right. Right. What are your letters? C-U-B. It's cub. Very.
Okay, so you notice that she was able to segment those sounds from those words from that object, and then figuring she had already learned all of the letters that represented those sounds, so she was able to actually start spelling with the objects. But you notice how the last one, I played it all the way till the last one because I wanted to show you when she had cup and then she had to change it to cub, how she couldn't figure out where to put the book at the beginning or the end, and she kept switching it back and forth, which was very interesting. And then she checked herself by saying the whole word, but she had that object, that bear cub, to actually hold on to in her working memory. She was actually in kindergarten in that video, I think, or she had just finished kindergarten and they wanted to hold her back. And she was a struggling reader, and it runs in their families. Her brother's dyslexic, and she's dyslexic, but that was after a month, maybe 2 months of therapy, of one-on-one therapy for 2 hours a week. And we're just teaching with that 3D object. And she was able to manipulate and do all of that. She didn't have to memorize those words. She actually segmented them and then figured out how to spell those words. So thank you so much. And I know we're gonna do some questions probably, if there were any questions. So we'll move on into that.
We have a lot of questions.
Oh, great. I don't know if
I've been hanging on to them. So there are quite a few in the chat that are asking, where do we get the objects? Are there kits that you can purchase of those objects.
Mhm.
Do they have to match your Foundations program or whatever program you're using?
Mhm.
What was another one? There are a lot related to the objects.
Okay,
Question
so
confusing kids. If it's a beginning sound, are they always exactly the same object for a certain sound, or a beginning sound, or a middle, or an end?
all right. So when first of all, to purchase the kits, they do not necessarily have to. The ones that go with all of the spellings that follow the Connections program, you have to be trained to get all of those, but we have several add-on kits that people can purchase if they want them. So you can go to our website. We have phonological awareness kits, we have elision kits, we have sound chaining kits, we have A to Z object kits, we have plural kits, we have collective nouns kits. So there's several different kits you can choose from to add into your program that you're working with.
And Kelly, I'll type the your website in there if you tell me.
Yes, so sorry, it was on my other one. I forgot to add it in. It's applegroupdyslexia.com. And you can always, when you pull up that web page, you can always send an email to info, and Mary Margaret Cherry and our office manager, Laura, Cherry doesn't get the email, sorry. She never checks them, but Mary Margaret, Laura, and I check all of those emails. We have several people that check them, so they won't get missed, but you can always email. So there's several objects that are stored on that. As far as when you're introducing sounds, whether you're doing initial, medial, final, however you're doing that, I have several objects for my students to choose from because I want to match by alliteration. I want them to hear whatever sound I'm teaching with all those different objects. So I do not teach with just one object because there's not just one word that sound is in. So we're exposing them to all types of different words and objects with the objects that sound is actually heard in. If you have specific students that struggle, like there's one little girl, Presley, that struggles. She's a severe dyslexic. She on the letter F. I had several objects, but she chose one favorite object out of my kit, which was a white picket fence. And she had trouble matching that letter to that sound, so she chose that object. And we always had that object on the desk when we were doing therapy, and now she's almost finished, so she doesn't need that object on my desk anymore. But for a couple of weeks, a month, she needed that F, that fence on so it kind of depends on your students. But when I'm introducing, I use lots of objects to build that vocabulary and show that those sounds are in more than just that one object.
I had a question regarding confusion. So with the objects, if a kid was thinking that it was the beginning sound and you put the same object out, would that potentially cause confusion if they were working on something different?
Well, if I was working on beginning sounds and then I wanted to change to ending sounds and I was using that same object, like for example, if you had the dog and you wanted to use it and then I never use my objects. The only one we use, because it is difficult for students to have the ending sound of a dog when you're working with the g. It's always the initial sound that you want to spell and read with objects because it's a lot easier for students. The only one that's going to be tricky that you can't use is box. I mean, like a fox or a box for the sound, because that is only at the end. So that's when, otherwise we would use, like when I'm reading and spelling with objects, it's just the initial sounds of the objects. But like you saw the spelling rule with the final ch sound, I use all of those objects to teach the final ch sound because they're figuring out why there's that spelling rule, what's going on in that word that to make that sound spelled a certain way.
So there's another question about the research behind putting letters in an arc instead of in rows. Is the research behind that?
I don't know of any research. Oh, sorry.
No.
I
The
closed
closed
captioning?
captioning, yeah, she had to go to another meeting.
Oh, okay, so I'm okay. I don't have to close that out. Okay, so I don't know of any research. We do it at the Apple Group. I was originally trained out of LEAD, and we did an alphabet arc, and so we just use pizza pans. We do have some teachers that use just jelly roll pans or cookie sheets to put them in 2 rows. So whatever works best for your students.
There was also a question in the chat that came up regarding the, well, initially, I kind of answered a little bit, Kelly, because I knew enough about this bit, but a piece about the document camera giving the words a little bit of a shadow of a 3D, and explain, well, that was your tempered glass.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, I had glass underneath it.
Could you talk a little bit about the glass, because there seems to be some chats back and forth about how cool.
Oh, well, it is. The glass is cool. The glass is actually, and I can pick it up and show it to you. This is a big piece of glass, but it's actually windshield glass. And we use glass trays instead of white boards for our students. And I know that we'll probably have some naysayers out there say, you cannot use glass trays with your students. You can if you teach procedures. Our students never pick up those glass trays. So we use them because you can actually slide underneath, cards underneath, whether you're teaching handwriting or they're tracing. It's another way they lock the sound to symbol in. They put that card underneath the glass tray and use a dry erase and trace it. We also put words underneath there, and the kids can code the words, divide the syllables, all of those pieces within it, and they're a lot easier to clean than whiteboards. You can just use Windex and clean them, and they don't get all gummy. So.
And what happens after kids are able to segment and spell, like the little girl in the video? What do you do next?
With the objects?
Well, what's the next in the sequence to getting her to being able to read words?
We had the word card. So she, at that time, she was not modeling that. She was just modeling it with the letters. So the cards are actually, even in our first lesson with reading with objects, the 7 letters we teach in lesson 1, there are word cards that so the kids are using, they're seeing that progression from concrete to abstract with the word cards.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No. And then there's another question here. The glass trays, where do we get the glass trays?
Well, there's 2 places you can get them. You can actually order them through us if you'd like. We mail, in fact, I just mailed, I think, 18 to Pennsylvania. Somebody in Pennsylvania just ordered 18 of them. But you can also, if you have a glass cutting place in your town, just ask for windshield glass, because it's windshield glass, and you will want them to round the corners. So it kind of depends on, we buy them in bulk. We have a company here that does, or a manufacturer that does them for us in bulk. So I don't know, for us, they're $12, I think. Yeah, $12 for the size, which would be half this size. I don't know the price where you would find it, but it is windshield glass. So you'd have to ask for that.
Just to keep as close as we can with our time, I'm sorry about starting late. I'm gonna save the chat if I can, and I'll save the questions as well, and I'll forward those on to you, Kelly. Do you have an email or a way that anybody can get in touch with you?
Yes, you can, info@Apple Group.
Okay.
info@applegroupdyslexia.com, and like I said, Mary Margaret and I will both get that in our office manager.
Okay.
So we'll do that.
I just wanted to thank you so much for facilitating the session and doing it solo when you thought that you were going to have a partner on this today. And, I wanted to thank everybody else for their patience and for attending the session. You guys were really wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
This has been recorded, so you will be able to watch the recording again if you're interested, or share it with people who you think might be. Pat and Literacy team will be creating some supports that are aligned to each of the presentations to help support families and teachers as well.